So welcome to the first History Bites of 2021, the Guelph Circa 1999 edition. My name is Dawn Owen and I'm the curator at Guelph Museums. History Bites is a 1-hour-long casual conversation during which we chat about the latest news, exhibitions, and other things happening at Guelph Museums. Join us on Facebook Live on the third Wednesday of every month at noon. Today's History Bites was pre-recorded. The recording will be available on the museum's website and on our other social platforms after Wednesday, January 20th, when we broadcast. So before I introduce and welcome our 5 guests, I would like to focus our thoughts within an awareness and acknowledgement of the land. Guelph is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Anishinaabe peoples, specifically the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. Through the Between the Lakes Purchase, No. 3 Treaty of 1792, the Mississaugas of the Credit ceded to the British Crown over 3 million acres of land between Lakes Ontario, Huron, and Erie. Today, Guelph is home to many First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. Guelph Museums commits to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action. We must do more to learn, share, and support truth and healing. And when we started the History Bite series, we spent time in close conversation about the land, its history, and its peoples. We continue to build our knowledge and relationships in preservation and protection of the land. And this commitment informs all that we do at the museum and includes today's conversation. So let's travel back to the 1990s. Downtown Guelph was vibrant, brimming with entrepreneurship, teeming with energy. Barb and Doug Manette ran the Bookshelf, a cultural hub in the city. Of course, it was a cultural hub then, and it is still now. They commissioned photographer Dean Palmer to capture downtown's unique social environment through a portrait series. Barb, Doug, and Dean, and forgive me, Dean, if there are more people in that mix, but I know that the 3 of you came together to compile a list of more than 100 downtown personalities, local business owners, and people who were shaping Guelph's cultural community in the 90s. They called the project the Green Room Series, and the completed series featured 16 portraits. The Green Room Series was donated to Guelph Museum's permanent collection in 2018, and the exhibition Guelph Circa 1999 represents the series in its entirety, downtown Guelph on the cusp of the new millennium, as it were. And I would say too that when Barb approached me about offering the collection of photographs for our collection at the museum, I was immediately thrilled and immediately saw in my mind the potential of an exhibition. So here we are, actually, in the midst of the exhibition, but of course, we are also in the midst of a pandemic and a lockdown and a stay-at-home proviso. So although visitors can't come to the museum currently and actually see the exhibition live, we hope that today this conversation will connect people into that experience. And hopefully, fingers crossed, we get to open the museum again when it's safe. And welcome visitors back into the museum to have a firsthand experience of the exhibition and the portraits within. So I'm really pleased today to welcome 5 guests to History Bites. The first, of course, is Dean Palmer. So at age 13, Dean turned his dad's wine cellar into a darkroom and began to hone his photography skills on roll after roll of film. I can relate. During university, he landed a part-time job at Pond's Camera on Wyndham, where he encountered fellow photographers, including Tom King and Grant Love, both of whom are 2 of the portraits in the exhibition as well. Dean founded the Scenario, his photography studio, in 1995. Dean, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this. Very exciting.
Awesome. I'd next like to introduce Ajay Heble. Ajay is the director of the International Institute for Critical Studies in Improvisation and professor in the School of English and Theatre Studies at the University of Guelph. Ajay is also Artistic Director Emeritus and founding Artistic Director of the award-winning Guelph Jazz Festival and Colloquium, founded in 1994. Welcome, Ajay.
Thanks so much, Dawn, and hello, everyone. Happy to be here.
Next is Ian Findlay. Ian opened Thomas Video when he was 18 years old and still in high school. It was the beginning of the movie rental era that by 1990 was dominated by chain stores like Blockbuster and Jumbo Video. On his first day in business, Ian offered 250 movies on VHS tape for rent, which increased to 28,000 titles, plus music and games at its peak. Ian, I know you've done a lot of other things in this community as well, but welcome to the show. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Dawn. Thanks very much for the opportunity. I'm looking forward to our chat this afternoon.
Great. And Jessica Steinhauser. Jessica is an award-winning ceramic artist who works on a grand scale, breathing new life into the ancient tradition of Kakhlaven. Forgive me, Jessica, for the pronunciation. I know we've done projects together in past, which featured your practice, and I've never quite said that word right. Raised in Germany, she immigrated to Canada at age 22. Jessica settled in Guelph in 1989 and opened her studio, Stonehouse Pottery, now called Stonehouse Kakhlaven. Jessica, please say hello.
Hi, everybody, and I'm so excited to be here with you all, and I kind of wish we could be all meeting in person, but this is as much as we can do, and it is Kachelofen, but yes, hello.
Should we go around the table? Kachelofen. Thanks, Jessica. And Mark McAlpine. Mark became the body piercer at Nighthawk Tattoo and Gallery in 1996. Then as now, his focus has been to provide the latest in piercing services while maintaining the highest standards in health and safety. Mark works with the local health unit as part of a program that goes into high schools to teach safe piercing practices. I'm so fascinated with what that program might include, Mark. But for now, please say hello. Welcome.
Hi everyone. This is amazing seeing you all. So thank you. Thanks for including me in this.
Thanks so much. So everyone, in an ideal world, we would have gathered in real time and space, of course. But here we are in the middle of a pandemic under lockdown and stay-at-home directives, gathered virtually. I think we need a little bit of time travel and a little bit of levity to get through this Blue Monday. So I'm so glad that you've all gamely joined me to chat about Guelph in the 1990s and for a bit of 90s era trivia. And of course, we promise not to keep score. Well, Emma might. She's in the control room for the museum recording this, so I'm sure she'll keep a tally, but we won't tell anyone. So here we go. So what I'll do is I will share my screen. Bear with me here. I'm always so impressed with the people who can do this so fluidly in the midst of a presentation. Okay. Here we go. All right. So the very first trivia question to kick off our conversation is, and of course you can see an image here from within the exhibition. This is Dean's camera that he used to shoot the series. You'll recall as folks who were part of the making of the series itself. And a little bit of the exhibition you can see in the background. So our first question for everybody is, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, which photography-related verb entered English vocabulary in the year 1992? And Dean, if you know the answer to this question, let's just give the rest of our panel an opportunity to answer so that we can test their knowledge.
Is it digital image?
It isn't, but that's a good guess.
Cockle selfie? No.
Nope.
Is it to take a pic?
That would be a great guess. No, it isn't to take a pic.
How about digitize?
And you guys are all over this question, but you haven't quite landed on the answer yet.
Huh.
Dean, do you have an answer?
I'm going to guess to Photoshop.
You are 100% correct, my friend. To Photoshop, right? We just use that term so liberally and casually these days in our conversation. Excellent. Yeah, and that really sort of tips me off into the first part of our conversation, which is really about this idea to make a portrait series that represents or reflects a neighborhood, a community space, a group of people who come together in interesting and unique and collaborative ways. So, Dean, I wondered if you could talk a little bit about sort of that moment in your photography practice when you were presented with the opportunity to create this series. You didn't choose to do it digitally, although that was, that was sort of like the emerging kind of photography of the day. Maybe you could share your thoughts and experiences of that moment.
Yeah, it was definitely an effort to take a traditional approach. It was very much digital at the time was not really established very well yet. I had bought my first digital camera in 1999, and it was a Coolpix 5. It was 1.2 megapixels. And then 2 years later, I got another. I mean, these were point and shoots because to get something capable of producing a large image that was reasonable to blow up at that size was just too cost prohibitive. But 2 years later, I got another point and shoot that was 5 megapixels. So it was really that time period was the start of the snowballing of quality with digital. But I wouldn't have wanted to do it. The project it was very much let's take a more time. I'm not sure timeless is the right word, but traditional approach to the project for sure.
I have to say, and I'll confess publicly now that my first digital camera purchased around about that time was an HP. That is Hewlett Packard digital camera. So that tells you where my mind was at the time. And what I used to love about that camera was that it took horrible images really, but it also took about 10 seconds of video. And I loved the idea of shooting a 10-second video. Like, what could you do with that chunk of time? Now today, of course, really anything's possible in that digital environment. And I think there's lots of creatives out there who are doing really brilliant things. I'm not suggesting I was doing a brilliant thing. I was inspired by what that 10 seconds represented, but it's a very different approach than what we see in the making of this photo series, Dean. And I think too, the fact that you were shooting and printing in a traditional wet darkroom, and that these images, I was so impressed when we started talking with you about this exhibition because there was one photograph in particular that had some damage, and I thought, you know what, we literally have 10,000 photographs in the museum's collection, probably many more than that. And not all of them are in great condition. So I want the whole series. No photo is going to be left behind in terms of the collecting. And you still had prints from that initial series, and we were able to actually swap out one of the images, and you presented me, I think I still have them in my office because this is just before the pandemic hit when we opened this exhibition and had everything framed up. And it really is interesting to me that in this moment when we're reflecting back over the last 20 years in terms of digital imagery, that has been sort of the most of what we recall or remember about the 2000s in a photographic context, right? This is sort of digital image making. But in fact, that wasn't part of what this series represents. So yeah, and if maybe we could just take another brief moment to talk about, how do you go from sort of amassing a list of probably well over 100 individuals who you're interested in including to creating a series that ends up being 16 portraits. Can you walk us through that journey a little bit, Dean?
Well, it was those initial meetings were really kind of everybody just spitballing names, and of course, I only wanted good-looking people in the walls in the end. No, it was it was really it was really an interesting process because it was really just, well, what about this person? What about this person? And then it you know, you'd whittle it down based on trying to get a general representation of age, ethnicity, all just trying to gender, trying to make sure it wasn't too heavily skewed to one demographic. And when you only have, I shouldn't say only, when you there's 16 in the end, it obviously you can't always, you know, do. And there were actually a couple. I did photograph more than 16 people. And there were various reasons why certain people said, no, I don't want to be in a place that sells alcohol. And so, yeah, so there were a few that you know, that was the reason. Some were not available. Some just said, no, I don't want to be photographed by you. So it was really, it was a very interesting process. And there were even some where it's like, no, I don't want to photograph them. And Doug specifically was like, no, not that person. So,
Oh, he's not even on the call to defend himself, Dean.
yeah, I know. But but it was you know, a lot of those were, you know, it was he had and I wish I could remember the name of it, but he had a bar that he used to frequent that had all these black and white photos on the wall. And he was describing this place, but he said there were maybe 100 pictures on the wall, but you know, we knew that would not be feasible for me to photograph 100 people. So it was a lot of give and take, a lot of yeah. A lot. I mean, I wish I could have photographed all the people whose names we came up with. That would have been marvelous. But
I'm wondering if that list exists somewhere still.
I think it might. You know, it might be in a storage locker with all the contact sheets and the negatives. Yeah, but
Just out of curiosity, that would be really interesting.
yeah. I mean, and it would have been it could have been a whole other slate of portraits. There were, because there still are. There's so many interesting people and interesting faces. But yeah, that was the main impetus, was to get a real broad generalization of.
Yeah, it's so interesting, right? And I'd love to ask each and every one of you about why you said yes, if you could even recall why you said yes in the first place. Over time, those details can go with the memory, but you know, it's interesting. It's an interesting segue to just sort of talk a little bit of chatter about what the bookshelf was then. Of course, it didn't just wasn't created in the 90s. That has a much longer history than that. And of course, it's still very much a cultural hub in our downtown Guelph community. And so my next question as a segue to that really has to do with some kind of events that were happening in the bookshelf at the time. And I will throw an image up on the screen here to share with you, and a trivia question. And so the question I have for you next is, which major literary competition began in 1994?
Is it?
And I think that there's probably a number of people on the call who probably know this answer more readily than others, possibly. But feel free. There's no rhyme or reason to how you should or when you should answer this question.
I'm thinking it's Canada Read.
Great guess, but not Canada Reads. No.
I was gonna say, but no.
The Giller Prize?
Dean, what did you say?
The Giller?
Yes, you're right. The Giller Prize.
I think
Yep.
Dean should be excluded from the trivia.
I agree.
It's the Dean show. I did not give him the questions ahead of time.
I don't think you need to. I think he'll answer everything.
So just out of curiosity, can anyone else name any of the other books that were honored with the Giller Prize in the 90s?
The 90s.
Just throwing it out there. You can Google while we're chatting.
Wow, I didn't know that. I would have been set up.
Well, we didn't send you rules. The Book of Secrets by M.G. Vasanji. A Fine Balance, Rohinton Mystery. Alias Grace, Margaret Atwood. Barney's Version, Mordecai Richler. The Love of a Good Woman, Alice Munro. And A Good House by Bonnie Bernard. So I wondered if, and this is a general question for everybody on the call, what was the bookshelf like in this time frame in the 90s? Do you guys have memories sort of the energy of the space, or even just generally in the downtown area? What's your reflection or your memory of that time period? Who wants to get us rolling?
Yeah, well, maybe I'll start. Yeah, I mean, the bookshelf was certainly a cornerstone of the cultural identity of Guelph, and I think it helped to sort of till the land that many of us other were able to follow, such as in my business. I think I was able to do what I was able to do because of the bookshelf. So it really was a cultural hub, but it was a meeting place as well too for the community. It was rare that you'd go in there and not recognize somebody and have a half-hour chat, and then you go over and you'd end up in the cafe sipping some lovely coffees or something. So it really became not only the cultural hub but a community hub, and I think it still very much remains that today. You still can go in there and still see your friends, your neighbors, family. It really is, keep using that term cornerstone, but I think it's apt in this particular example.
When I first came to Guelph, I had fallen in with a group of townies and some of the punk rock kids and the rest, and they had mapped out 3 or 4 different places in the downtown area where guaranteed cup of coffee, because a lot of them were underage. So the bookshelf in the upper area, the green room at that time in the 90s, you could be there well into the evening just drinking coffee. And I knew it was a spot where if I was looking for people or looking for just word on what people were doing on the weekend, right away, the green room, that back area cafe was exactly the spot. And it was so much fun. And then by extension of going there, you went to the bookstore and you went and checked out whatever the movies were. So it was this moment of meeting up with all the people that I wanted to see who weren't in my university group, and then expanding out from there. And really, for me, an exposure to what Guelph was, coming in as a student originally, and then, finding this culture in Guelph and wanting to be a part of it. And that was, the bookshelf was that grain right there in that middle of it.
I can relate to that. When I first came to Canada, 1988, my language was not so good. I didn't know anybody, and weekends were very lonely because during the week I was working, but weekends were lonely. And during the week, I would make sure that every morning I go to the cafe, have a muffin, which was new for me, these muffins, and sit always at the same table, possibly, because it was nice to talk to somebody. And it was the friendly waitress, Jenny Fish. Does anybody remember Jenny Fish? And she was pregnant at the time, and she was guaranteed to talk to me, so I'd feel at least somebody talk to me, because if you are so new to this country and language and town, it can be very making you homesick and lonely. But that really, like, even now it gets me emotional, but it was just, then you felt like you belonged a little bit to this place. And for sure the bookshelf. And then later I discovered upstairs I could go there by myself and just sip a glass of wine and not be feeling as lonely. So for me, it was definitely more, not much with the books. I don't read much, but just the community again, making me feel like I'm welcome and I will feel home someday, which I still do now. Yeah.
I would agree with what my colleagues have said, that I heard about the bookshelf long before I actually moved to Guelph in the 90s. And when I came here, it was so clearly the cultural center of our community. People said it's where you would go to meet people. But I mean, how many places are there where you can, not only go get like an independent bookstore where you can buy great books, and the staff were incredibly knowledgeable. I still remember Dan Evans, who seemed to. It was almost as if you'd read every book in the store. Like you would go in and say, "Oh, I'm looking for a book for my friend so and so or my sister." And he'd say, "Oh, what is she like?" And he'd suddenly, go down the aisle and pull out something from some obscure section and talk all about this book. So amazing staff. It was really the kind of vision of a public sphere that the bookshelf represented. But not only books, but of course, as people have mentioned, films, independent cinema, and then music upstairs, and a restaurant. Like it was all there. So an incredible place, and still is, of course.
Yeah. And I do miss. Do you remember the patio on the very top?
Yes.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it up there. One thing I did want to say about the bookshelf is that if this series of portraits had been done somewhere else, then Doug and Barb would have been, subjects. I would have done their portraits for sure, but
Yeah,
they
you
sort
have
of
to say that.
excluded themselves from the project because of where But yeah, that was a wonderful place. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. I mean, I feel like on any one of these questions, we could just spend our entire time within that conversation, which is kind of like the best kind of conversation to have. But I'll use this as an opportunity to segue into our third question, which I'm centering around Mark, Nighthawk tattoo and piercing. And I wanted to share an image with you, so I will do that now. And open it up here. And so what you're seeing is not only a detail of Mark's portrait that's in the series and in the exhibition, but also a quotation which comes from a 1991 Maclean's Magazine article. And it says, quote, "Until recently, tattoos were worn mostly by soldiers, sailors, and other men who wanted to project a tough masculine image. Now they're becoming popular among blank." So what we're looking for is the blank, folks.
And when was the quotation from, Dawn?
1991. It's very much of its own time, I will say, this quotation.
Clearly puppies.
Puppies.
That's right.
That's a great guess, but it's not the answer.
Not lost puppies, eh?
No.
So not men and not lost puppies. Who else is there? Not men, not dogs.
Millenniums or whatever you call them.
Millennials? Yeah, Jessica, you know what? I'm going to give it to you because the actual answer is young professional men and women. So the men are in there. They're just differentiated because they're not soldiers, sailors, or other men who subscribe to that kind of masculine identity. So says Maclean's Magazine in 1991. So we're having a little bit of fun with this, of course. And it only really just tips us into sort of the ancient history, really, that's cross-cultural, worldwide, in terms of tattooing and piercing practices that have been performed really for as long as we can trace that time, our human history. And Mark, I'm interested to hear from you, particularly in the early 1990s. You joined Nighthawk was it 1996, if memory serves?
Actually, a wee bit earlier.
Earlier?
I was working as sort of the front desk staff and helping out and that, and then sort of over the year or two, couple years that I was there, had the opportunity to apprentice. And then in '96, I kind of used that as my marker for when really, as a business for me, it was sort of, all right, this is on you now to take care of. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's so interesting, right? And of course, Nighthawk at the time was really in the downtown core. Of course, it's not, although it's not downtown, still thriving in terms of a studio and a space. Also, I think very much still a gathering place for people as it was then. And could you describe for us a little bit of that? What was the energy at Nighthawk?
Yeah, well, I mean, that was all down to Laurie Stewart, who is the owner and the founder of Nighthawk, and the amazing energy that she has. So, I mean, Laurie has this funny sort of persona where you might say, oh, she keeps to herself. She's not prickly, but she also has a very fun sense of humor where if you don't know what's happening, you're like, oh, is she mad at me? So, but she had this ability to sort of just create a space where she didn't really care if you were not interested in, a piercing or a tattoo, but you needed somewhere to spend a couple hours in the afternoon. So we would have some younger folk coming in who, were not there for any kind of procedure, but just wanted to chat, just coming in with artwork and sharing artwork or talking about ideas, or just we had a TV going and a couch and they would sit and watch TV for a little bit and then kind of meander out on their own. So she was very good at creating an environment where, well, first of all, no judgment. So she didn't care who you were. If you were a decent person and at least polite to other people in the space, you were welcome. So, it was interesting. You would have people coming in the door who, were just fresh out of jail, walking past their arresting officer who just finished having a tattoo, and there would be a nice nod and a little bit of slight conversation and then you would move on. And that was indicative of everybody who was in there. But you would have these moments where you were like, wow, this is amazing to just kind of have witnessed this very neutral ground where nobody came in with any kind of baggage, but it was a safe space. And that's all on Laurie. So, that's what attracted me to this place. That's what kept me there all these years, is working beside her and Mac and Sally, who are all there. And we're all these folks who found our way into that orbit and then stayed there, much like Guelph, to be honest. You get sucked into it. You come from elsewhere and you never leave. So for me, that was the shop. And that's my hope, is that I'm giving that energy as well, as welcoming as I was welcome. So yeah.
Thanks so much, Mark, and I was really enjoying your reaction, Ian, to what Mark was saying, and I feel like there must be a story in there somewhere, but I'm not sure if it's one you want to share or not.
Well, maybe Thomas Video was like that too. You come pick up a movie and share that space with your arresting officer. So,
We've all got them, right?
I love that, and I love that you've just given me the perfect segue into my next question, my next image, which I'll share with you here. Bear with me for just a moment. Here we go. So you'll recognize this portrait, Ian, and it's just a detail, of course. There's what I'm sharing with you today is just little details, just to kind of whet your appetite in terms of seeing the actual full exhibition, hopefully soon. And so the question that we've prepared that's related to your own contributions to the cultural hub of downtown Guelph in the 1990s through Thomas Video. And I'm not sure if this is a movie, Ian, that you would have stocked at Thomas Video, but nonetheless, here's the question. What was the top grossing movie of the 1990s?
Titanic.
Dean, you're gonna get right. You're right. You're gonna get to answer last for all the next questions.
I was pretty sure it was a buddy
Did you
cop
just
film of
answer
some
this
sort.
question?
Dean did.
Oh, I don't. Oh, okay.
Oh, Titanic, right? There.
Titanic. Yeah. Sorry. Did you all hear? Titanic. Yeah.
Am
So
I still
Ian,
on the screen? I'm not on the screen anymore.
so Jessica, we can hear you. Your screen
Okay.
is dark, but your audio is good. So if you're comfortable, we'll just keep on rolling.
Yep. Okay. Not sure why.
Awesome. If it might be that your video will come back on over the course of our conversation too, or if you'd
Okay.
like, you can log out and log back in. It's completely up to you.
Yeah. No, fine.
Okay, good. So back to Titanic. Would this have been available on your VHS or DVDs there at Thomas Video?
Yeah, absolutely. We had Titanic, and it was very popular. But our most popular movie in the 1990s was not Titanic. It was, Dean, you should know this answer because you know all the answers here.
Okay,
Thomas Video's most popular movie in the 1990s was
the one with the Austin Minis racing around Milan.
close, Italian Job, close,
Italian Job.
with
Oh.
Nail and I.
Oh, of course.
Really?
Yes.
With Nail and
So-
I, a
so
small
now-
little independent British film produced by George Harrison, starring a virtually unknown Richard E. Grant at the time. He must have been about 22 or something. But I would say for about 10 years, that was my #1 renting movie. People came in and rented With Nail and I all the time. And it was mostly because nobody else had it. None of the other shops carried it. We carried it. And that was the kind of films that we did carry. We carried sort of the art house films that you would be seeing playing at the Gorge Cinema or the Princess Cinema, or the Bookshelf when it got its cinema running. You couldn't see those on television. They weren't playing there. You could see them in little repertory cinemas, but they just weren't regularly available. And that's exactly the kind of film that we would bring in. So the films like Mediterraneo or Trois Couleurs, Mediterraneo, Babette's Feast, the David Lynch films, his whole canon of films, Coen Brothers canon, Al Hartley, Jim Jarmusch, all of those films found an audience at Thomas Video, and that was our bread and butter. That turned the lights on every day, was that kind of thing. Yeah, we had Titanic, absolutely, but you could get Titanic anywhere. You can only get With Nail and I at Thomas Video.
That's so awesome. And I have another question for you, but I see that Jessica, you're back in the call, which is so great. We can see your lovely face. If I could ask you just to close your other link in the call, just because there's a weird little audio thing that happens when you have two calls happening from the same source. So you're in the call twice. So if you can close down that other call, that would be awesome.
Did.
She's so awesome. She should have 2 screens.
I know, right? And if it's misbehaving, that's fine too, because
Is it working now?
yeah, we can hear you and see you fine. So I was getting a bit of feedback in the audio, but
Is that still there? Yeah. Okay.
only a little bit on my end, but
Okay. I don't know. Do I have any other windows? No, I think this is it.
okay. All right. Well, we'll just keep rolling. And Emma, if you in the control room, if you can somehow disconnect that other call, then that would be awesome. But otherwise, we won't worry about it. It's all good. So Ian, back to you. When we were chatting initially about your portrait and what Thomas Video represented at that time and for many, many years after this time in Guelph, I was really taken with this sort of community curation of the collection there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I didn't come from a background of film knowledge. I didn't study it in school. I didn't watch a lot of movies growing up. So for me, the whole medium was sort of wide open canvas. But what was great about being in downtown Guelph, and I'll certainly kudos to the Bookshelf for tilling this land a little bit, is that my clientele helped direct me in what movies I should be bringing in. They were telling me that I needed to be bringing in Down by Law. It was requests were driving me bringing in Chinese cinema, Russian cinema, Belgian cinema. That's what helped to make my buying decisions. And it just snowballed from there. Like people would see that I would be receptive to their requests and their suggestions. I'd get them in, the requests in. I'd give them a call, say, hey, that movie that we talked about a couple of weeks ago, I was able to find a copy. Sure enough, that night they'd run down, they'd rent it, they'd tell two friends and they would tell two friends. And so it was the community that really helped me build my collection. I'd love to say that I came up with all those ideas myself. I didn't. I just would have had 3 Clint Eastwood movies and maybe Italian Job. Then that would have been all the movies that I would have had in my store. But it was people like Dean and Jessica and Mark and Ajay who were saying, I know Ajay's a big Werner Herzog fan. He turning on that. So it was the community that helped create my collection, and I would always be very grateful to them for helping me do that.
I feel like Thomas Video had a huge impact on broadening my horizons in unexpected ways for me, but just exposure to films that I had no clue about. You go down on a Friday night, just kind of wander the aisles, and you could never make a wrong choice. So I would come home with a Bruce LaBruce film or John Waters for something that just totally blew my mind open. Stuff I'd never seen before, had concepts of, and then be back the next night and be watching a Kurosawa film that, again, anything subtitled. I just grab it and see because I had no exposure to it. And so films that I'll still watch now that I first learned about by wandering into your store. So massive impact on my taste and interest and expanding it, and just being able to be open to just grabbing something and knowing that you couldn't make a mistake in your store. It was amazing.
Nice.
My memory of the store was, I think before I met Dean, but again, weekends, there was no laptops, there was no stuff. Weekends were always the lonely ones when you're in a new area. And do you remember, you rented VCR players? So I remember you carried this in this like pizza thingy, foamy thing, and carrying the VCR renter and player, and then also this movie with Katie Lang, Salmon Berries. I've never heard of anything like it, and for me it was just I think that night I watched it probably twice because there's nothing else to do, and you don't know anybody, you just plug it in again. And yeah, anyways, it was just when we knew we was talking about this came for some reason, renting the VCR player and Katie Lang or whatever. There you go.
Nice.
I miss so much about Thomas Entertainment is, like, even now you go on Netflix or whatever, and you can't find stuff, and it'll be like, you watch this documentary about a serial killer. Perhaps you might enjoy watching Friends, and it's like, no, I don't want to watch Friends. And so the algorithms don't seem to work, but the staff knew, you go in and you say, yes, watch this. This was great. And they're like, oh, you might love this. And also just how you would go with friends and you'd all split up and you'd all wander around and you might pick something up and you'd all congregate and what about this, what about this? And that was almost...
You had to calculate more time into going to Thomas Video because you are bound to bump into all the bookshelf people, all the people you knew. Everybody had to talk to. Like, you had to really allow for more time. Anyways, just had to.
Let's not forget the dog.
Yeah.
Phoenix, yeah.
My earliest memories of Thomas Video, I think again it was shortly after I'd arrived. Sheila and I had arrived in Guelph, and there was an obscure film from Burkina Faso that we were really interested in seeing. And I think we'd never been to Thomas Video. I think it was pretty early on. We walked in and Ian was there, and I think we said, "There's this obscure film from Burkina Faso," and Ian right away said, "Eli, here it is." we were sold from then on. Amazing.
I was going to say for me too, because I came to Guelph through the University of Guelph, so I did my undergrad there, and one of the first places that I was told to go was Thomas, and it was like one of the first reasons for me to leave the university island. You know, I lived on campus, I ate on campus, all my friends were there, and then we were like, okay, let's get on the bus. We're going to go downtown. We're going to go to Thomas Video. We're going to pick some films. We're going to watch them together. It was really awesome. So, and I think that, you know, that's true of a lot of the places that are represented through the personalities in this portrait series, right? And I've got some more sort of along those lines questions for you a little later on in our conversation, but I'll use this as an opportunity to move on to our next image and trivia question. And I'm going to share my content and open up the image. And so what you see here is a detail of Ajay's portrait. And the question is, this is the only multiple choice question. So we're giving you a gift here to try and get the right answer. The question is, what was the name of the 90s radio show hosted by Ted Riley on Jazz.fm 91? And there's 4 options for your answer: the jazz standard, the jazz scene, jazz it up, or today in jazz. And I don't know, Ajay, if this is a program that you followed or listened to, and if it is, maybe I'll ask you not to be the first one to answer. And Dean, if you know the answer 100%, you're not allowed to answer either. So it's over to you, Jessica, Mark, and Ian. Do you have an answer for us?
Well, jazz is not my strong suit, but I like the sound of jazz standard, so that's the one I'm voting for, whether it's right or wrong.
I'll just say jazz it up.
I'm just going to go jazz it up as well.
Okay, you're not right yet.
Oh, choices again?
Okay, let Dean in on now.
Yeah.
I want to find out what Dean knows.
Dean.
I jazz today, was that an option?
Today in jazz, it is an option.
Yeah, that's
Ajay, is that the right answer?
Oh God, I don't know. I would say the jazz scene, actually.
The jazz scene. Yeah, that's the answer. The jazz scene. We weren't trying to trick you. No, and really that's an opportunity for us to kind of launch into a discussion with you, Ajay, about the Jazz Fest. I refer to it as the Jazz Fest. I feel like, you know, when I first came to Guelph and started sort of making my way, building my career, you know, I was working at the McDonald Stewart Art Center for a long time. And one of the very first things that I got to do was engage the Jazz Fest and Colloquium. And that was absolutely a highlight in every calendar year. I think this community, you know, obviously by now really is invested and expects it. It's exciting. It has taken all kinds of different sort of creative diversions. But I'm interested to hear from you, Ajay, in terms of just like back to the sort of beginning of the Jazz Fest, launched in 1994. What was the need that you were, or the gap in our cultural scene that you were seeking to fill with the creation of the Jazz Fest?
I think for me, I had come from Toronto, where there was a really, at the time that I left in the late 80s and early 90s, there was a very vibrant jazz scene. And when I moved to Guelph, that seemed to me, this was the kind of community that would support a similar scene. At the time, we already had a number of thriving festivals. We had the Hillside Festival. The person who hired me to teach in the English department, Connie Rook, of course, had started the Eden Mills Writers Festival. And I like to believe, and I often joke, it may be true, but I like to joke that she hired me because I think during my interview for the position in the English department, I said, oh, I want to start a jazz festival. And of course, Connie would have got it. She would have understood, right? But this is an important thing for Guelph. So we had the Eden Mills Writers Festival. We had the Hillside Festival. We had the Guelph Spring Festival. I think we may even have had some iteration of the Guelph Film Festival, or maybe it was dormant at that time, but it had existed. But we didn't have a jazz fest. And it struck me that this was the kind of community that would support that kind of event. The challenge for me was that there were festivals popping up left, right, and center in Ontario, I think around that period in the early 90s, mid 90s. And so why do we need another jazz festival? So from fairly early on in the festival's history, the goal that we set for ourselves was to do something a little bit different and to really work on a festival of experimental, avant-garde, innovative jazz and creative improvised music. When we started in the early years, it was a bit of everything. But by the time we got into years 2 and 3, it became clearer and clearer that we were moving in that direction, and that's where we needed to put our energy. And it paid off because very clearly, within a few years, we had people, jazz aficionados who would travel here from far and wide to be able to attend these performances. And when I think back on it, I realized that what I wanted to do was to combine the kind of energy and focus of an international festival that would draw aficionados who would travel across the globe to see these artists, but also to remain rooted in the community. So I was certainly, I was inspired by what I was seeing by what Connie and Leon were doing at Eden Mills with the Eden Mills Writers Festival, where that sleepy little village of Eden Mills comes alive. For that day or that weekend in September. And so I wanted the community rootedness, but I also wanted the international vibe. So that was really the goal. And again, from fairly early on, the idea was to try to do something a little bit different and to feature artists you wouldn't see at the other festivals.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes me think about sort of like this approach that we have to a lot of the work that we do today in a lot of different sort of cultural communities and really around the world. This is sort of right now we can embrace the sort of local to global kind of concept, right? And I think in the early 90s that wasn't sort of rolling off the tongue, right? It was, I was, as I said, I was working at the art gallery. It was very much, looking very locally, looking at the long lens of time, but always squarely sort of citing our work in that sort of local space. And I think that the Jazz Fest was really one of the first sort of community-based creative spaces where I think that those of us in the cultural community who were trying to do some things, trying to push some boundaries, trying to sort of grow and mature the work we were doing in a city that was also growing and maturing, right? So I really, really appreciate that. It's amazing to think what 20 years over that span of time, which seems, in my view, like the blink of an eye, there was a lot going on. And I wonder if the rest of our group here can really speak to sort of, if not specifically the jazz scene, maybe the music scene in Guelph in that era. Any thoughts or sharings that you might have along those lines?
I have one thing related to the Jazz Festival, and this would be as someone whose musical taste, I had no exposure to jazz, but what I loved, especially it seemed like in the early period of the Jazz Festival, I remember I would wander into a store or a place that you just do in your normal routine of going to, whether it was one of the cafes or and there would be one of your musicians playing. It would be part of the Jazz Festival, and I would kind of wander into it, and like you said, unusual stuff, like just music that I'd never heard or really been exposed to, and I'd be captivated by what was going on. And having, as a community member, the allowance to be exposed to that was really kind of, it was great. It was just another awesome thing about Guelph was just, going into a spot where you have certain expectations, you're kind of on auto drive, and then you're like, whoa, what's this? And so thank you for that. That was formative.
Yeah, I had a similar experience with Mark. Someone from the Jazz Festival came in and said, would you be interested in being a venue for the Jazz Festival? I said, well, this is a video store. You don't do that. And they're going, well, why not? And I was like, oh, actually, you're right. Why not? And so for the first couple of years, yeah, we were a venue. And just like Mark was mentioning, that folks would come in and suddenly be exposed to this sort of blow your mind jazz that you wouldn't hear normally, certainly not in a video store. Yeah, so it was really, I was proud to be part of it, and eventually it sort of outgrew Thomas Video and got into some bigger and better venues. But yeah, exciting times in those early days.
My favorite one, I mean, and not that I like music or also stumbling across, but I just remember when you had the street closed, and it was going well beyond midnight or midnight, people drinking beer on Wyndham Street, and it was raining and people didn't care, and everybody was some bare feet and just wandering through, and you bump into people you haven't seen. I'm not a huge jazz fan, I'm sorry to say. But I liked the vibe when you walk downtown and you just know, oh, the jazz festival is on. You can wander down, drink beer, and catch something that, yeah, actually, maybe I do like jazz or whatever. But mostly, again, you bump into people and community, and I just it made it hum in downtown, and that was. I just have this one rainy memory, very late at night. I don't know why, but there you go.
I've always believed that when people ask me about the festival, of course it's about the music, but it's always, I think it's about more than that. It's about reinvigorating public life with the spirit of dialogue and community. So I think what you're saying is right on. Like, of course it's about the music. I love the music, but it's really about the community for me. Yeah.
And I'd love to, Ajay, because like my initiation into improv jazz and the way that the Jazz Festival was presenting it and collaborating and creating new performance was truly that an initiation for me. I wasn't part of that scene. I didn't know the music. I didn't even know to ask for it, to be honest, in those early years. And I'm reflecting back and also thinking about how improvisation, is again something that today we're much more attuned to its potential, to its activism, to its ability to tell story and to share experience. And I wondered if you could say share a few thoughts around sort of improv as a tool in social justice or social community-based social justice work. Can you speak to that at all?
Sure. I mean, that is the work that I'm doing now with the International Institute for Critical Studies and Improvisation, which I think, as you said, is really an outgrowth of the work that we were doing for many years as part of the Guelph Jazz Festival Colloquium. The example that I often like to give is a moment during the Guelph Jazz Festival where I, as the artistic director, might bring together musicians who had never met, who would have come from different musical backgrounds, different cultural backgrounds. Often they did not even have a language that they could speak in common. So there's one example that I give where I had musicians from Mali, from Ethiopia, from Mexico, from the Netherlands, from US, from Canada, maybe somewhere else. They had never met before, or most of them had never met. There was literally no language that they shared. Like, not all of them spoke English, not all of them spoke French, right? So
music is a language.
Music is the language, yeah, exactly. And they met for the first time in front of an audience on stage. And they didn't sit down, they didn't say before the performance, oh, let's think about what we're going to do. We're going to start with a groove and then slow down, or we're going to play in this key or in this time signature. They just started to play. And they created absolutely wondrous music. And so from a research point of view, through my institute, the kinds of questions that I'm interested in asking, what does this tell us about what it means to negotiate difference within the context of a community? What does it mean in terms of listening, really listening to what's going on around us? Because God knows we all need to learn how to listen, right? What does it mean in terms of trust, social obligation? Like these are actually really important issues. So my argument is that there's something profound going on in that moment where musicians are improvising, something that can actually teach us something about how we might best get along in a globalized world. So a lot of the projects that we do with the Institute are attempting to test the efficacy of improvisation as a model for social change. So we run programs with community partners all around the world. Of course, the Art Gallery of Guelph, where you worked for many years, the McDonald Stewart Art Center is one of our longstanding partners, but we also partner with social service organizations that run programs for aggrieved and at-risk populations, where we run programs, bringing improvising artists into those communities. So I'll just give you one example with Kids Ability Center for Child Development here in Guelph. We've been running programs for over 12 years with kids who have physical and developmental disabilities, and running workshops where improvising artists come in and work with the youth and stage a public performance at the Jazz Fest. And the research piece is that we document it. We videotape it. We do interviews with the staff at the organization, with the parents, with the kids, with the musicians who are facilitating the workshops. And it's amazing the stories of impact that we hear about the impact that these programs, these workshops are having on these youth, the way they're listening differently, the kind of leadership skills that they're taking on, their ability to get up in front of an audience of thousands of people and take a leadership role, which, their parents might say, I would never have thought my kid would do this. So there are several examples, over the years that we've amassed, but the focus really has been on looking at improvisation, not just as a musical practice, but also as a social practice. And, the kind of models of social cooperation that it can make happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot about, what kinds of community spaces invite that kind of experience and exchange. And then also how what is learned in those exercises and practices and engagements impacts and changes that community, right? And I think, I think all of us, for example, today I'm working as a curator at the Guelph Civic Museum, and I often think about what is community engagement? What are we trying to do when we gather in this space or when we gather in another space, but under sort of the agency or with the support of an organization like a museum? What does that mean? How do we understand that? And I think a lot of sort of those questions surface through acts like what you've just described, right? Where it's like, we have grown to be more comfortable in asking the questions and not so much fretting about the answer or the outcome of those questions, but taking the journey and the process. And I think, for me, sort of that immersion every year within the Jazz Festival. And let me say, my learning curve personally was extremely high in terms of sort of engaging with the sounds and the kinds of expressions and the ideas that were being communicated through the Jazz Fest and the colloquium. And then I think to myself, I was kind of like the perfect guinea pig, somebody who didn't walk into it with a lot of assumptions. And if I had them, they went out the window pretty quickly. So really, really appreciate that. And I'm going to use that as my segue into the next question, which is, again, kind of about the potential of community. And this one is going to engage specifically Jessica and your image, which I'm going to share. And let me open it up. Here we go. So a detail of Jessica's portrait in the exhibition and in the series, of course. And so the question is, the Canadian Clay and Glass Gallery in Waterloo opened on June 19th, 1993. What ceremony did they hold to mark the occasion?
I guess I should.
Were you there?
I don't think
Were you
so.
there, Jessica?
Oh,
Dean, do you know that? Out.
does anybody have a guess then?
Smudging?
That's a good guess, but it wasn't a smudge, no.
A firing?
Well, I'm assuming that there was a firing that happened after the event itself, but it was a hands in clay ceremony. They've been sharing some media around their recent anniversary, so I thought maybe it would have popped up in your mindset. But anyway, and that really gives me a chance to connect in with you, Jessica, around sort of the, you came to Canada, you chose Guelph as your place to settle and to really seat your practice. You opened Stonehouse Pottery in 1989, I think not long after you arrived in the city, if I'm correct. What was it? Can you reflect on what was it that drew you to this particular place and sort of the potential of creating a studio so soon after arriving?
It was literally. I came to Canada and I needed to place. So I had a job lined up in Beamsville and it was horrendous. I was a production potter for $7 an hour. And it was in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing around. Tim Hortons maybe, but that's it. And I knew that if I stay here, then I'm going back to Germany. somehow I ended up in Toronto and asked somebody if they know somewhere where I could work, and they mentioned, "Oh, you could give my friend Eve Geisler a call. She might need a production potter." And then I called Eve Geisler, and Eve Geisler said, "You know what? No, I don't need anybody, but I have a friend who might, and her name is Goldie Sherman." So my incentive to come to Guelph literally was, so I called Goldie from Toronto. I was in my parents' friend's penthouse, lived up, I don't know, some high rise, whatever. And I called up, and this is what made me come to Guelph. It was, "Oh, hi." So I called Goldie, and Goldie says, "Oh, hi." And she says, "Oh, you have a nice voice. Why don't you come by?" That was it. That was the extent. That's why I'm in Guelph. So if you guys know Goldie Sherman, I think she should have been one of the portraits as well as so many. But yeah, literally, that's it. So then my friend drove me from Toronto. This was a 60-year-old, and Dean knows who this is, but it doesn't matter. It was, drove me to Guelph, and I lived with Goldie for 2 weeks, and that was it. And I worked in her studio to pay rent. I made mugs for her, and that was it. I never came to Canada to open Stonehouse Pottery. I never came to Canada. I just came because I wanted to work somewhere, and it definitely was not a decision, "Oh, I'm going to look at places where it's a cool community." It was really none of that. It was pure chance and pure luck, and I'm really grateful that it happened to be Guelph. Like later, people says, "How did you pick Guelph?" Like, it's such a artsy place and blah blah blah. And to be honest, I came in October, September, and I came to downtown Guelph, and I thought it was god awful ugly. I couldn't believe why people would. I'm sorry, it was no downtown. It was gray. It was rainy. It was. I didn't understand where the downtown was. Like, there's none. Like, to me, coming from Europe, obviously, there's not, comparably. So, yeah, it took a while to really fall in love with Guelph. But it was more the people, for sure. That's it.
That's so interesting, Jessica, and absolutely. When you brought up Goldie, I was like, "Oh yeah, that makes sense." That there was sort of like a logic there that's embedded in all of my interactions with her as well. And it's interesting also hearing you say, like your impressions of Guelph at the time, coming from a place that was much more storied and has a longer history, and in terms of like downtown urban spaces, it's hard to compete with the European city, and also I mean, if we look globally, and the ancient cultures and the cities that have been born and raised and cultivated in other spaces around the world, absolutely, the city, like most in North America, are young, right? It's a young city still.
I come from places that are 400 years old. My little village is 400 years old. They celebrated maybe 20 years ago, 400 or whatever.
Yeah, and I would love to hear you share with us a little bit of just the evolution of your pottery practice, really through, you've just changed the name. I think you did that on the anniversary. Was it the 30th anniversary, no, 20th anniversary?
30th. I think
30th.
30th, yeah, kind of, yeah.
Yeah, so 30th anniversary of Stonehouse Pottery now becomes Stonehouse Cockle Oven. Did I do it right?
Yes.
All right. It took me a long time. We've done a major project together too, and I struggled then and I struggle now, but thank you. Yeah, could you share with us a little bit about, sort of the vision you had for creating that part of the business, which now, of course, is the main work that you do. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the company is, I guess, when I started my apprenticeship, I was 18 years old, and it was then that I decided that someday this is what I want to build, and that's like so my apprenticeship, yeah, was like 40 years ago, maybe, no, 35 years ago or something. Like, it's been a long time dream. It's a very long dream, and so when I came to, again, I did not set out to, when I first opened my studio, to oh, I'm gonna make these kachelöfen. It was something that grew over time, even though it was always my dream to do it. The timing wasn't right. Like I was 22 years old. My English was shit, and I couldn't explain what these stoves are and who's gonna even hire me to build a stove if nobody knows what they are. And I know that Ian was one of the earliest people that I told this dream about, because he was then my first client who actually trusted me with this project, which I'm still so thankful. And obviously, it was a gradual thing. So I was very happy being a production potter. I was very successful. People liked my work, and I never really worked on trying to figure out the next newest thing or whatever. It's just, I just did what I like doing. And I think that's kind of lucky, because it didn't feel, even though the journey has been horrendously multiple disasters, you just follow the next step. I don't know, or just keep going on your dream. And this long journey, has I guess has paid off, because now I have lots of clients, and of course with Dean on my side all along through all our ups and downs. Or it's been, Dean has been an immense supporter of this whole dream, even when our kids were little. I mean, there were times where he was like also frustrated with this disastrous journey. But right, Dean?
Not to put you on the spot or anything.
There were some challenging moments for sure. But no, it's been remarkable to see the change from the production pottery to what she's doing now, for sure. And yeah, Ian has the first one she ever built, which is pretty exciting. Is it on right now?
And I still don't know how to pronounce it, so I just go oven.
And I didn't know that, actually, that Ian, you were the first to work with Jessica. I did not know that.
Yeah.
So cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd been hearing these stories for a long time from Jessica about this thing. I wasn't sure she was saying a corn cob oven or I didn't know what she was talking about. And then it just so happened that I came into a property that we were looking at doing something really interesting. And I said, well, Jessica, let's start that conversation. Let's really start listening to what you're talking about. And yeah. Wasn't long, but I guess it was fairly long. We had to convince the city and building departments and fire departments and all that.
Not to mention the nameless guy. It's been amazing, and I cannot even believe that it's happening. Or yeah.
Well, congratulations to you, Jessica. And if I may say, thank you, everybody, for your willingness to jump into this conversation. We prepared more trivia questions, more points of discussion, but we are over an hour already, folks. So I don't know if you've had as much fun as I have had. That time went by really in the blink of an eye. But I really appreciate that you all were game to jump in on today's conversation to share a little bit of your thoughts and reflections from the 90s in Guelph to connect us into what you're doing today as well. I deeply appreciate that, and hope that you'll also catch the recorded version, the broadcast version of this conversation, which will take place on Wednesday, Jan 20th. So thank you again. I will say too that in February, our next History Bites is focused on a concurrent exhibition to Guelph Circa 1999, and that exhibition is called Lay of the Land. And really, it's a journey through sort of pictorializing land through map making and other kind of journeying practices. And it's really anchored by the Indigenous Atlas of Canada, and that is a major project project, and we're going to be talking to a number of people who were part of the development and creation of that atlas, and you know, connecting in with some key folks who can help us all to grow within our Treaty 3 knowledge, and really talking in a very personal and direct way about land relationships. So hopefully you and our listeners will be able to join us for listening and taking part in that conversation at our next History Bites. As I say, it's February 17th, which is the third Wednesday at noon next month. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you, Tom.
Nice to see you
Bye,
folks.
everyone. Thank you.